was the tweet from Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok confirming the cabinet's unanimous decision, while adding that justice and accountability are a solid foundation for the new rule of law-based Sudan they're striving to build.
It's a great and significant day for the pursuit of international justice, especially with regard to Sudan. Former president, former dictator Omar al-Bashir is one of the longest-running fugitives from international justice. You know, he made a narrow escape from South Africa in 2015 when I think he had to flee from Sandton Mall to the airport and get out of the country quite quickly. But I think, this latest decision is probably about the Sudanese transitional authorities also being able to save face a little bit and find a way of collaborating with the court. And I suspect potentially trying to have a domestic trial with some kind of ICC involvement.
While the move has been largely welcomed as a step towards justice for the victims of Darfur's genocide, nothing currently stops Sudan from assisting in the transfer of various indictees sought by the ICC, including former President Omar al-Bashir, by virtue of a Security Council resolution in 2005 that referred Sudan to the Hague-based ICC, but also instructed the country's authorities to cooperate with the institution. Bashir is currently being held at a high-security prison in Khartoum on separate charges relating to corruption and the coup that brought him to power in 1989.
Bashir is literally under indictment for the worst crimes that human beings can commit against one another. Genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. He has been wanted by the International Criminal Court for a very, very long time. And the Sudanese authorities could definitely hand him over to The Hague tomorrow if they wanted to. But I suspect that both sides here want to find some kind of compromise which allows him to be put into a courtroom in Sudan and held accountable for these crimes.
Bashir and 5 others, including former Sudan Defense Minister Abdel Rahim Hussein and former Interior Minister Ahmed Haroun, stand accused of atrocity crimes in their response to a rebellion against the Khartoum government in 2003, launching a scorched earth assault that led to up to 300,000 dead and the displacement of millions more.
An entire generation has grown up in Sudan who have probably not a direct awareness of what happened in Darfur in the early 2000s and the scale of the atrocities, the scale of the human suffering there. But I also think there's a rising generation in Sudan who are actually very aware of their own human rights, of their own kind of belief in the need for a democratic transition in Sudan, and who are pushing for people like former president, former dictator Bashir to actually be held accountable under international law. I think that's a very positive thing.
Last year, a senior pro-government Janjaweed commander, Ali Kushaib, surrendered to the ICC, where he faces charges of persecution, murder and rape in Darfur between 2003 and 2004, becoming the first suspect taken into custody in The Hague. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.
And Sherwin joining us live from New York now. Sherwin, thank you. You've just had some reaction from the United Nations to this decision by Sudan. What are they saying, given that the UN has been so involved in peacekeeping in Darfur, although I think that operations there are currently winding down?
Yeah, you're referring to UNAMID, the AU-UN joint hybrid peacekeeping mission that is winding down operations in the Darfur region, that mandate ending at the end of last year, Francis. And of course, the UN, therefore, by virtue of its involvement, perhaps, certainly very well placed to comment on this. We asked the Secretary General spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, what his reaction was to these developments from Sudan's cabinet. Stefan said that this was a first step in the legislative process. He called for that process to be allowed to play out. He called it an important first step. He said the ICC globally plays an important role in accountability for human rights violations. And of course, you'll remember, Francis, that South Africa withdrew its battalions, its SANDF battalions from that peacekeeping mission in 2016, being part of that process since 2008. So I think a lot of stakeholders around the world very interested in the decision taken by Sudan's cabinet yesterday.
And a lot of those stakeholders, especially anyone interested in international justice, welcoming the move. But I guess, Sherwin, it also shows how slow the wheels of justice can turn, given when these atrocities were committed. What are the broader implications here?
Right, so you'll remember that Sudan was not and is not a signatory to the Rome Statute and therefore not a member of the ICC. And so the International Criminal Court did not have any jurisdiction over Sudan. But there is an Article 13B of the Rome Statute that empowers the UN Security Council to refer a country situation to the court, whether that country is a member of the ICC or not. That's, of course, exactly what happened in 2005 and really has very broad implications. You had very broad implications in terms of how this would play out. You'll be aware, of course, Francis, that senior members of the UN Security Council, and here I'm referring to the permanent members, the United States, Russia and China, are also not signatories to the Rome Statute and therefore not members of the ICC. And that really complicated this mandate that the Council had given the ICC, given the fact that so many of its senior members were also not members of the court. I also asked Simon Adams about the relationship, Francis, between the pursuit of justice and the notions around reconciliation and peace, right? I mean, Bashir certainly still has a constituency in Sudan, and how this could play out in the future. This is what he said.
Justice, reconciliation, truth, and accountability are difficult topics. It's not easy for any country to do it, whether it be South Africa, Sudan, or any other country in the world. But I do think that the climate of impunity in Sudan has actually made powerful people who have committed atrocities against their own populations feel like they can get away with mass murder. And I think that has endangered the lives of all Sudanese, not just people in Darfur. And it's very clear that under the former dictator, they took the lessons they learned in Darfur and applied them to other areas as well. South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and committed atrocities there too. So I think breaking that climate of impunity is absolutely essential to helping to build a democratic Sudan that enhances everybody's human rights.
So another question raised, Francis, is what this judicial process will look like in Sudan. You'll remember that former South African President Thabo Mbeki headed a AU high-level panel that was tasked with exploring ways to secure peace, justice and reconciliation in Darfur. Their panel recommended the establishment of a hybrid court constituting of Sudanese judges and judges appointed by the African Union. So it begs the question whether the recommendations of that 2009 report will be adopted by the new transitional authorities in Sudan, and what the relationship between those recommendations and what the ICC seeks to do, how that will play out is certainly an open question.
Sherwin, back to the UN, talk a bit more about the role of the Security Council, its role in what became this more than a decade-long standoff between the ICC and the government of Sudan.
So the Council refers Sudan to the ICC in 2005 by virtue of a resolution, Article 13B of the Rome Statute. You then have sort of this intransigence that develops over time. Members of the court, members of the Security Council and their geopolitical divides playing itself out in how it then wanted to support the mandate it had given to the International Criminal Court. You had Fatou Bensouda, her predecessor before that, coming yearly to the Security Council to present them with an update in terms of their investigations and essentially begging them, Francis, to help them effect the warrants of arrest that had been handed down by the judges of the ICC for the 6 accused in Sudan, including former President Omar al-Bashir. It's a question I asked Dr. Simon Adams to weigh in on. This is what he said.
They sort of did their job in terms of referring the case to the International Criminal Court and then in some ways kind of just washed their hands of the situation. And so we've had these, years and years and years in which the ICC has gone repeatedly to the Security Council, asked for their support in terms of arresting Bashir and getting him in front of the ICC, and nothing has happened. Nothing, the decisive change had to come from the Sudanese people themselves, which was their revolution, which changed their government. and where people were asserting their human rights. And now suddenly, Bashir is in custody, and he may actually eventually have to face those charges of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity.
So in many ways, Dr. Simon Adams there is saying that the developments we are now witnessing in Sudan by virtue of this cabinet decision, Francis, is happening because of the people in Sudan and not because of the Security Council, but despite or in spite of its inaction over the last decades.
I had a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, live for us from New York.